And Shoshana, I want to follow that thought in your own forthcoming biography, because it is a biography. You are going to, among your other informative facts and insights, be dealing with all the same things that Anne did, that Ayn Rand herself didn't think were important. So number one, how are you going to handle that? And incidentally, since you chose to read a portion of Atlas Shrugged about the childhood of her characters, Dagny and Francisco, what can you tell us about Ayn Rand herself as a child that she might have thought was important? And lastly, while we're on the subject, as I overburden you with a big question, why don't you tell us how it came about that you were chosen to write the authorized biography of Ayn Rand, and what news sources you're using?
Okay, that's a long question, but I think I can relate the different parts. And also, I think what I have to say on the subject is related to the quotation that you put at the front of the chapter. Because this was a document Ayn Rand wrote, and it was called Letter to the Readers of the Fountainhead, because she was getting all these fan letters in which people wanted to know more about her life and they couldn't find it in the usual sources. And so she, in fact, started by saying that she would like to say, I only want to talk about, the things I think. All you need to know about me is that I wrote The Fountainhead. And then, if you read the rest of the document, she did go on to talk about those events, but she does it from the point of view of how they relate to her as the person who wrote The Fountainhead. Because, in fact, she also says that I have had no private life in the usual sense. That's what she says, her private life's not important. No private life in the usual sense. Well, yes, nothing about Ayn Rand is going to be in the usual sense, right? And she said that what's more important is the content of one's brain rather than the accidental details of one's life, things that just happen to you. But in her life, things didn't happen to her. She observed, she drew conclusions, and then she became a writer different from what might have happened to all the other little victims of communism or whatever. So in fact, for her, her life, and this is what I'm trying to feature in the biography, her life is very well integrated. Her actions, her interactions, her reactions, her reading, her writing, all of that is part of the story of her choices. And she started choosing very young. And I've got to now choose to tell you just one story about her as a child, so I'll tell you one of my favorites. Okay, this is a story that, I wasn't there, but this story that happened when she was about 7 years old. And she had learned to read before she went to school, and she read whatever interested her. Her parents did not want her to read the newspapers, so of course the newspapers were something that was very interesting for her to read. So one day when she was reading the newspaper, she read that an alleged educational expert had said that the role of schools is to give children ideals, and that if a child does not learn ideals at school, the child will never have them. And Ayn Rand said, half a century later, I still remember, and I'm not quite quoting, but this is the gist of it. She said, I still remember the vial of anger I felt when I read that. How dare she say that when the exact opposite is true? You see, Ayn Rand had her own ideals by then. She knew something about ideals, and she knew something about the kind of ideals they taught at school, conformity and obedience and authority and so on. So she thought, exactly what school is poor at is conveying ideals. And so she thought to herself, she said, and I remember thinking, when I grow up, I'll show these people, and I'll denounce this particular woman, and I'll make my case. Okay. And she said, this was my first memory of thinking that the world of ideas was my business. The world of ideas is my business. Well, when she was 7 years old, she probably could do a lot better than a lot of other people, but when she didn't think she was good enough to quite do that adequately to explain to other people, but when she grew up, she did. And the same anger stayed with her because her anger against what she opposed was part of the loyalty to the convictions she had. And so she did write with anger. Mark Twain talked about a pen warmed up in hell, and I think Ayn Rand had one of them too. And so she wrote with anger, she wrote with enthusiasm when she wrote about the things that she loved, and she never stopped. This was an eternal, from childhood onward, that she never gave up. Did you hear a story once, The Simplest Thing in the World? Do you know that? And it's about a writer who tried to write below his strength. Now, it didn't work out, but Ayn Rand, in her whole life, she never tried that. She never held back, she never took it easy, she never gave up, she never gave in. And so that's her story from childhood, and that's the story that I'm trying to tell in the biography. Now, I think I've already explained how I deal with that quotation, right? Because as she said, well, she's tempted to say, I only talk about the things I think. Well, the things that she thinks, that's her life. It's not as if somehow she had some other career non-thinking as being a swimming expert or something. She was always being, you know, from Elisa Rosenbaum time in, she was always thinking, using her mind, and pursuing her values. And that incidentally has to do with why I agreed to write this book. The way it happened, as I said, is I had asked for permission to quote from the drafts. I'd written an article on the drafts, and they're in the Library of Congress, so I had not had any special access to get to them, but I needed permission to quote. And I got yes, the answer was yes. Then I was asked if I would consider writing the biography, and my initial thought was, well, why would I do that? You know, and that wasn't entirely rhetorical. You know, why would I do that? Because I'd never thought of writing a biography as such. I was very interested in Ayn Rand as a writer, and I thought that the facts were pretty much known, the main facts. And then I remembered two things. First thing I remembered was that years ago I did some research on a very obscure writer who was interesting to me, but the puzzle was I couldn't find out anything about her. You know, no dates, nothing. Well, you know, I found her. She tried to hide between two layers of pseudonyms, but I caught her. And that was an interesting detective, following the trails and people and documents and so on. I thought, yeah, that was kind of fun. Maybe I could see if I could find out more things about Ayn Rand than what's known. And the second thing was I thought, you know, I'm very interested in the writing, and these drafts were so much fun to work with. That's, you know, Ayn Rand sitting and writing and thinking, wouldn't it be exciting if I could follow her for a lot longer than that? So that's why I said yes. And I said yes to do a book up to 1957, because I thought of that as a good stopping point. That was her big goal, to write that book, a race against time, she said, until she achieved it. She said, if a bomb were going off in the next room, I'd have to keep writing because I must get this book done. And incidentally, it doesn't have to be a bomb going off in the next room, but I also must get this book done. It took her 14 years to write Atlas Shrugged. I'm hoping to be a little quicker than that. Well, I can't really expect it to be quite as wonderful as Atlas Shrugged. I don't know what else could be, but I am going to try to get it done. And I think that's the story of how I came to write it and how the life fits in with the events, and a story about her as a kid.